What's up guys, this is Bolvar the Fell-Handed and this is the weak spot guide to the IS-4. I've had a lot of requests for this tank, so let's get right to it. Now, much like the weak spot guide to the IS-7, I'm going to go through different sections and we're going to do weak spots on a section by section basis. This is the frontal weak spots. Now at this time I should mention I am running an STB-1 Japanese Tier 10 medium tank, 258 penetration with your standard APCR, 330 penetration with your standard heat round. Dispersion is 0.36, and the reason this is important, I miss some shots at a stationary target. Moving on, let's get right to the armor, guys. The lower plate here, which I am having absolutely no trouble penetrating, is 160 millimeters thick, sloped at 40 degrees, giving us 209 effective armor. The upper plate, which I'm going through, is 140 millimeters, sloped at 61, bringing us to 289 millimeters of armor. Now, the angly bits on the side here, which I'm looking at now, these are a bit tricky because much like the IS-7, they are compound angles. You have a 160 millimeter plate sloped at a 45 degree angle and then 60 degrees off of that, bringing you to 453 millimeters of effective armor protection. Now I do end up penetrating them somehow, and it's either an extremely awesome penetration roll from my heat shell, because it is indeed a heat shell that goes through it. But here's the long and short of it, guys. If an IS-4 is facing you head on, I would not go for these panels because it is a bit ridiculous. Moving on with the turret armor. The turret on this tank is extremely tough. There is a small flat part directly above the tank, directly above your mantlet right there, if you will. It is extremely hard to find this thing in order to hit it. I just nailed it there. But you know, you have to be really close. You have to be in close quarters with this tank, in my opinion, in order to make this work. You're not going to be able to pull this off a long-range shot unless you are one with RNGesus. Now, you know, I mentioned the dispersion of this tank earlier. I'm at 100 meters and I can't even reliably connect with where I want to. You see, that shot dispersed. The shot before that completely whiffed. That one whiffed as well. So I may have to switch to a slightly more accurate tank. But the reason I'm using the the STB is because it has a very low penetration for a Tier 10 medium tank. And I kind of want to give you guys an idea that say, hey, if this low penetration medium tank can pin it, then so can I in my E5, whatever. Now, guys, the turret area is extremely strong, and the reason it's strong is it's hard to lock down exactly where your numbers are because it has so many different bands of armor rating. If you look at this thing in Armor Inspector, it's going to give you a lot of different numbers if you just move the reticle just a tiny bit. So even if you were in a Tier 10 TD, I would most likely avoid this tank's turret because it's extremely tough to pin unless you hit the tiny bit at the very front of it. Now, moving on, you can pin the driver's hatch in the middle. It is very difficult, but it can be done. There is not a weak spot that I am aware of underneath the mantlet of this tank, much like your IS-7. Right there I went ahead and I hit the top of the turret there again, the little hatch. Not an easy spot to hit. I'm getting closer here to see if I can hit it reliably, if I can, you know, hit it on command, and it turns out it's still not as easy as it looks. This is a monster of a tank. If you can get it hull down, you can be assured he's going to be there for a while. Moving on. Now, we are going to look at over-angled weak spots before angled weak spots. I see a lot of IS-4 drivers get out there and they turn this thing at a 45 degree angle. What you're looking at right here is a strictly a 45-degree angle, which IS-4 drivers think that they can present themselves like that and they can do work. This is completely over angled. Now right now I'm focusing on the lower plate. The lower plate, upper plate are going to be the only things that are effective at this position. And guys, the bottom line is if your tank is positioned in such a way someone is reliably pinning you, you're doing something wrong, or they're just super lucky, or they're one with RNG. Either way, the bottom line is you have to move. Now I am focusing on the upper plate here, the driver's hatch, the middle, the upper glacis, if you will. I am going to focus on the compound angle on the side, and the reason I'm pinning the compound angle on the side is because it is no longer a compound angle. It is just an angled piece of steel. I'm going right through it. This is the exact same tactic I showed you guys to use on the IS-7. Extremely effective. I'm shooting heat, I'm shooting APCR, I'm shooting what have you at it. Very, very effective. So I highly recommend, if they are over angled, go ahead and put it into the flat compound angled armor on the front, left, and right of the tank. Now the top of the tank here, I'm not having very good luck with. I'm putting rounds in it, not a lot is happening for me. I've got a heat loaded, the heat goes right through it. Now the bottom line here, guys, is if you are fighting this tank, you need to bring a hot round because it is extremely tough. If you fire even further back on the tank with your standard round, it is more likely going to bounce. You have to be running a very hot round, and as you see, I'm really only pinning with my heat rounds and not my standard APCR. So you just have to be aware that even if this tank, even if you have an unexperienced operator, you are still going to have problems with this tank because it is nearly completely sideways. Moving on, these are your angled weak spots. These are at a 25-degree angle, which is a fantastic angle. Very, very good. Now, as we see, the lower plate is a weak spot. You get this tank behind a building, you get it behind a rock, you start side scraping, you are in business. You're going to be able to do a lot of work with this tank. Now the upper plate is still pretty tough. You still have that strength, and it is angled, so I'm not getting a lot of success with APCR nor heat rounds. I am firing on the compound angle right here. Your standard round will most likely end up bouncing. You have to run your heat, your HESH, your premium rounds, your gold rounds, even to get through the little bit of compound armor, because even though it's not that thick, it is just extremely tricky to pin. Russian angled tanks are very tricky as a general rule. Now I'm firing on the side of the tank. This side of the tank is almost invulnerable at this angle. You're not going to have a lot of luck. The reason, of course, guys, I'm only shooting the hull and not the turret is because if you are 1v1ing an IS operator, he will most certainly be looking at you, and you will not get what small weak spots there are on the side of the turret. And of course, much like the IS-7, the turret of the IS-4 has odd bands going through it here and there, so you may shoot at the side of the turret and you may end up bouncing. These tanks, IS-7, IS-4, you are never guaranteed a penetration, so just be aware of that. Now guys, I'm not really going through the angled turret weak spots, because if you are 1v1ing an IS-4 operator, he will most likely be looking at you, and then you're going to have to deal with the front of the turret weak spots, of which there are few. So that's why, you know, we're not really focused on turning the target towards the enemy. Now I did put a round in the turret ring right there, and it did what I thought it would do. Absolutely nothing. Moving on, let's look at just the straight side of the tank. You know, we did this on the IS-7, we're going to do this on the IS-4. It's more or less straight. up, you know, there's a little bit of spaced armor. I'm not really going to go through the numbers because there's not going to be a whole lot of mystery bounces here. Now right there, you remember I said the turret has bands of different strength armor that run through the turret. I hit the side of the turret almost near the front and it bounced. I have to run heat just to get through the side of the turret at this particular angle. Of course, I could have got a low penetration roll. We do not know because we are not privy to those numbers and what happens as the game goes. If we did, a lot of people would be burnt out because that's an incredible amount of information. Moving on, the second heat round I fired went through the turret, of course. The rear of the turret can also be tricky. As you can see, I bounced around off the rear side of the turret. So you just need to be aware of that. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't shoot the turret no matter what angle you are, because this is one of the toughest turrets in the game. A lot of people think the IS-7 is king of tough turrets, but this tank also has a very strong turret. I am hitting the compound angled armor to little success, because if you're facing this tank very front, it has compound armor. If you're facing it from the side, it has compound armor. Now, I am putting straight 90-degree shots in the side of this tank, and it does have a little spaced armor, but it's nothing like the IS-7. You can penetrate this tank fairly easily on the hull from the side, so you don't really need to worry about running your APCR, or your heat, but at the same time, if you listen to anything I said previously, I would always be running hot rounds when facing this tank because it is so tricky. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and do rear weak spots. Don't really need to do this, but I believe in being thorough. I want everybody to know exactly what they're going to be getting into if they fight this tank. Sometimes, guys, you're going to bounce off the sides of the turret right there where I am firing on. My dispersion here is kind of trolling me, so I'm not really hitting where I want to hit, but as you can see right here, if you just hurry, if you make a rush shot and you hit these auto bounce zones, obviously the shot will bounce off. You just have to be very cautious. You really have to scope this tank in. This is not a tank you just want to roll up in an auto lock and hope for the best, because if you do somehow penetrate it, I highly recommend you play the lotto. Moving on. The hull of this tank in the rear is not like the IS-7. It's not tricky at all. The IS-7 will still pull bounces off the rear of the tank at a given angle. This tank, however, you would really have to fumble a shot and hit a no hit box, which is on the left and right near the tracks of the tank. You don't want to hit the no hit box, and you know, that's something that may change from update to update. It's one of those things that they don't necessarily make the general public aware of. So some of these things you just kind of have to find out for yourself, because they're not going to say every small change that happens. And as you can see, the turret is still hit or miss. You might go through it, you might not. The base of the hull here at the rear is extremely easy, so pretty much anywhere you hit it, of course it's unangled, but anywhere you hit it at a straight 90-degree angle perpendicular to the tank, you're going to do work in it, which is always a good thing. Right below the reticle where that is the no hit box, so be aware of that. Thank you guys for watching the weak spot guide to the IS-4. I hope it helps everyone learn how to defeat this tank, and for you IS-4 operators, I hope this was illuminating. That way you can learn how to angle your tank properly, make the best use of it, so on and so forth. If you guys would like any requests on a weak spot guide, please let me know. Other than that, thank you for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you guys next time.